Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing The Ministry of Lost Things from Post Curious. This is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. I'll also say for the record that I hate reviewing games like this because I can't really talk about the game without spoiling things. So I could be like, I liked it, or I didn't like it, and that's kind of the most detail I can go into ideally. It's just very hard to review something where I have to hold back from giving you a lot of information. That said, I will go into a little bit about the game in order to try to give my thoughts as much nuance as possible without actually spoiling anything for you. So what I will say is if you want no context whatsoever about what's in this box, this review might not be for you, because I am going to go into the most minor amounts of context. And by context, I don't mean what will happen in a way that will spoil things for you, but rather I mean the general structure, how the cases are laid out. I will not be revealing anything outside of the introductory card that you get. I might even read the introductory card to you to kind of give you a feel for what's going on here. So if you want zero information about this game, you might want to skip this review. If you want like 1% information about what the actual game is, and then my thoughts on how well it executed on that, this review will be great for you. So, with all that out of the way, Ministry of Lost Things is an escape room style game. It's from Post Curious. This is Case 1, Lint Condition. It's the Puzzle Tale series. My understanding is this will be an ongoing sequence. So this is Case 1, there'll be Case 2, and 3, and 4, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7. I believe all in the world of the Ministry of Lost Things, but honestly, I'm not entirely confident. Maybe it's going to be, it says Case 1. It's got to be more things in this particular world. The general format of how this particular box is structured, again, prototype, rules, components, subject to change, is you're going to open the box and then get a bunch of envelopes. So over here, we suddenly have transmission 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and in my case, I also had a reset pack, but I've already reset it in order to send it on to the next person. I will not be opening any of these envelopes for you. I will loosely talk about this intro letter you get as well, and again, prototype and all of that. So we get a bunch of envelopes, we have a case, what's going on here? Well, this is the Ministry of Lost Things. You are the newest recruit, and your goal is to help people with their lost things. You see, I'm not going to read this word for word, that would take too long, but the general idea is the Ministry of Lost Things is the Ministry of Lost Things. Things get lost all the time, at which point they go to the Ministry of Lost Things in this fantastic world. Oh, this is the prototype rules over here. In this fantastic world of lost things. Things get lost, you lose, I don't know, your coins, your keys, all these things, and they go away forever. For the most part. But sometimes those things aren't actually supposed to have been lost. Sometimes you didn't actually lose that old scarf because that old scarf, whatever, it was actually meaningful. It was your grandfather's scarf and you really want it back, and it wasn't supposed to be lost to the nether regions of the world of the Ministry of Lost Things. And that's where you come in. When things go missing that weren't supposed to have gone missing, those things need to be returned to their rightful owners, and it's your job to track down all the things you need in order to do that. You need to find the thing in this fantastic world. You need to find the original owner. You need to go through all these troubleshooting steps, and that is the case. Lint condition. Your job is to find something and return it. That's kind of the loose overview of what's going on here. To that end, the tools you're going to have are going to have this sequence of envelopes over here. Each envelope will be a different step in that process, and then there's also going to be an online app where you can go ahead and punch in answers to things. So the app will say, oh, what about this? I'm going to make stuff up for the sake of this. Let's use that scarf as an example, and the scarf is not actually what's happening here, just for the record. The app will say, oh, we're looking for a scarf. What color is the scarf? And then you could punch in red or blue or rainbow or yellow and blue or whatever it is you need to do. In some cases, there's drop downs. In other cases, it's free-form typing, but you have to answer a question. The app will say something like, oh, why was that scarf meaningful to the person who lost it? And again, you have to punch in the answers to that. Each envelope, let's start with transmission 1 over here, each envelope is going to give you a series of questions and then direct you, when successfully answered, to opening envelope number 2. So when you answer, let's say the 3 questions are, what color was the scarf? Why was it meaningful? Where was it lost? Okay, those are the 3 questions you have to answer. Now, in envelope 1, it's going to tell you, in transmission 1, it's going to have a bunch of things in this envelope, and those things, when decoded in some way, shape, or form, when you solve the riddle, when you get to the answer, those will give you the answers you need to those questions. So that's the structure of what's happening here. You have a transmission, you have a bunch of stuff in the transmission, you have a series of questions you have to answer by the transmission, and when you do so, you put down transmission 1, and you go to transmission 2, and rinse and repeat until you've gone through all these transmissions. That's kind of the structure here. that's kind of everything I can tell you about what's going on here. You go through that until you complete the envelopes, and then congratulations, you've completed your first case. You are now a proud recruit, and they're excited to hand you more cases in the future. So that's what's happening here, and now it's time to talk about the review without being able to show you anything, because I don't want to spoil things for you. So here's the envelopes. This is everything you're going to see about this game. There's the Ministry of Lost Things. I hope you enjoyed, and now let's talk about my thoughts on the game. So, whenever you're covering an escape room series of any kind, whenever you're covering a game that's going to give you a series of riddles, it's ultimately my goal with the review is to try to guide you through the things that I liked about that in contrast with this giant world of escape room games, and the things I didn't like or were possibly not as good along the way. And to that end, I'm going to talk about, in generalities only, I'm going to talk about my experience with the Ministry of Lost Things. The first thing I'll say is the nature of the online portal answers. And it's not going to be sorted into my usual what I like, what I don't like, what I can see that's not liking. I'm just going to touch upon various moments I've had across the game and give you my overall thoughts on the experience. So I'm going to start with a few negatives, because I think, honestly, to a certain extent, the negatives are easier to get out of the way, because, again, I have to talk in generalities. But the first thing I'll say as far as the negative goes, in some cases, the answers could be brute forced when you go through the app. So for example, let's say you're asked what color is the scarf, and let's say the drop down menu has, 6 answers. The problem is every time you hit submit, it tells you, and it's a pro and a con, because I understand how they can solve this, but it would be problematic. So the tricky part is, I have an answer. I have a theoretical answer they can implement. This is an idea now. Now we're getting into idea zones. Because the problem is, there's 3 questions, right? And so you have those 3 questions, and I pick up the drop down and I say red. Okay, and it's not always a drop down. In fact, rarely was it a drop down. But even if it's not a drop down, if you know there's only 6 possible answers and you pick a solid color, whatever it is, I type in red, and then I hit submit, and the app either says yes or no. And while this wasn't relevant for most of the questions I went through, there was one particular aspect in which, because for the most part I'm trying to play the game to have fun, not to break the game. So in my case, I want to solve the answers, and I do that by entering the answers the way I think they are. And if I'm wrong, the app says, oh no, answer not verified. And then great, and I continue trying to find the answer. There was one particular moment in this journey in which I thought I had the answer. I entered it. I thought I had the answer again, I entered it. In this particular situation, there were only like 8 possible answers, and it got to a point, and for whatever reason, I didn't do that puzzle well. I messed up the logic in some way, shape, or form. Whatever it is, it's fine. I messed up the puzzle. But I got to a point where I was like, there's literally 2 answers left. I'm just going to go ahead and enter them. Rather than going through this puzzle again to figure out where I messed up, I'm just going to brute force those answers. And I was able to do so, because when I was wrong, it says answer not submitted. And when I'm right, it says answer submitted. And so that was kind of a part along this entire journey. There was one moment where I didn't solve the case. I just gave up and brute forced my way into the answers, which wasn't satisfying. But I was like, I could just repeat this puzzle to do it or go through that. And I didn't love that. Now the problem is, they could solve that by saying, well, we're only going to accept all or none as far as the answers go. So maybe it just says some of your answers are wrong. So if you have 3 answers, because it would be much harder if you do the math on that, the brute forcing of multiple answers and getting a all are right or all or none, then that wouldn't work. The reason they can't do that and shouldn't do that is because then you'd never know which thing you are wrong about. You might answer 3 things and then say, hey, something's wrong. And you would possibly be revisiting things that you are right about, which would be an even more frustrating experience. I think the way they could possibly solve it, just to adjust the gamification in all of us, is to have it so that when you click submit, if it didn't go through, like you have, let's say, 3 chances, and if it didn't go through, each chance after that penalized your score in some way. Because then people like myself, who for some reason care about what the final score of the app is going to be, we'd sit there and say, okay, we're not going to brute force our way, we're wrong in some way, we know that this one is the one we're wrong about, but let's really make sure we do the math properly on this before we lose our chances, if that makes sense. So there is a way to solve this problem. It's a small critique, and I'm spending a lot of time on these critiques to a certain extent, but they're not actually big deals. We'll come to that in final thoughts. I'm just trying to give you the experience I went through while still talking in generalities. So the app, while overall very well done, and I will say I possibly expected more hiccups given the fact that so many of the answers were free-form typing, and so much can go wrong when you're free-form typing. For the most part, the actual website portal worked really well and did the job. There was one specific point where I found it more frustrating than not. Outside of that, it was pretty fine overall. Outside of that, I'll say another thing that I did not love, and this is a minor spoil to the Ministry of Lost Things case over here, which is and again, most minor spoilers. I don't think it'll ruin your experience. I think me telling you this will improve your experience, but it's because I still want to give that spoiler. So, you know, if you want to skip the next minute and a half, by all means do so. The spoiler in this case, and again, it's not really a spoiler. I'm just trying. I don't know what you care about, so I have to warn you as much as possible. But I really don't think it's a spoiler. I think you should watch this, but if you don't want to, skip a minute and a half ahead. The basic idea over here is we have 5 envelopes over here, which to me, I thought I was doing step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5. In reality, I was doing step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, it was over, and step 5's like, congratulations, you won. I didn't like that. Again, not the biggest deal, not the end of the world, but it does mean that to me, I didn't realize, when I finished step 4, I didn't realize I was done. I didn't realize I had completed the case. I was like, okay, boom, bring up the next step. You win. Which feels anticlimactic. To me, when I'm winning a case, when I'm solving the puzzle, I want to feel like I solved the puzzle. And by the nature of the fact that they had 5 transmissions, but only 4 of them are actual steps, when I completed the puzzle, I thought there was more to go, and there wasn't. So I wish that had been more clear. I wish in some way, shape, or form it had been more clear when I was finishing and solving the final puzzle, because that meant the feeling of completion I never got. When I was completing the game, I didn't think I was, and when I opened envelope 5 and did complete the game, I was like, oh, I already did that a little bit. It's not the biggest deal. It is a small difference in expectations. Those are my 2 main complaints here. Outside of that, the usual things I look for when I'm trying to review a escape room puzzle style game is how frustrating was the experience, or how easy was the experience, because those are the areas where escape room games can go wrong the most. If a game is too easy, it's not a challenge and it's not fun. If a game is too difficult, it can just be frustrating. And I would say that the Ministry of Lost Things, for me, felt like the perfect amount of difficulty, which is something, by the way, that Post-Curious, at least in the games I've played from them, have generally done very well at. And when I say the perfect amount of difficulty, what I mean is I didn't need to get a hint for this game a single time. Not once did I need a hint for the game. I was able to solve every single puzzle without trying to get any sort of assistance outside of the puzzles being presented. And also, well, that's not entirely true. There's one puzzle. I'm going to give that asterisk to that one puzzle where I had to brute force my way in. I'll give that one asterisk. I'll try to give nuance and explanation of that one. But either way, so I was able to solve every puzzle with a little bit of brute forcing. I was able to solve every puzzle without needing a hint ever. And then on the other hand, not a single puzzle felt like a cakewalk where I didn't have to figure it out. Every single puzzle they presented, and it's not 4 puzzles, each of these envelopes gives you multiple steps to solve. And in every single one, I was like, what do I do? And in every single one, I was able to figure out what I did without needing an app. And that, to me, is the perfect level of difficulty in any form of escape room. They were not easy, but I didn't need to give up and move onwards. And I love that. And again, this is something that's been true in general. I haven't played everything from Post-Curious, but from the things I've played, this is generally held true, at least so far. So that's kind of I guess that's the most positive thing I can say about this Ministry of Lost Things. Going to that asterisk, because if I'm going to tell you that this is such a success on that, but then also I failed at a puzzle, for context, the puzzle that I messed up on and had to brute force my way through, the logic of how to do it, I successfully did. But without getting too much into it to avoid spoilers, the chain of following things, I somehow ended up wrong. So my logic was correct. I was able to solve it, but in some way I did it wrong. Think of it as like a long math puzzle. I figured out where the formulas go, but then somewhere along the way, I added 3 to 4 and got 8, and that messed up my entire chain, if that makes sense. And in that particular puzzle, I could either start from the beginning to work my way through it again and see where my math error was, or I could brute force my way through the end. So hopefully that makes sense, but I still hold by my statement that the level of difficulty around the puzzles was correctly done. For whatever reason, I made a misstep while following a logical chain, and rather than redoing it, it was either easier to just go, oh yeah, that was the answer instead, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my, I guess, pros and cons around the Ministry of Lost Things. It is a small box escape room. It's going to run you anywhere between, I'd say it's around half an hour-ish per envelope, but obviously you can get stuck on one. So I would say 2 to 4 hours. I think the box actually says 2 to 4 hours. The box says 2 to 3 hours. Box says 2 to 3 hours. I'd say in that range, 2 to 3, 2 to 4. Basically, on the slow end, on the fast end, you might run around half an hour per envelope. On the slow end, if you get stuck, it will take longer as far as how much you want to knock your head against a wall to solve any puzzle. I would say the overall world that was built building was fairly charming. The fact that it comes with a reset pack is fairly nice. I would say it's slightly lower. Like when I think of something like the Emerald Flames, which is one of my favorite games from Post Curious, it's definitely lighter both on the deluxeified components and the sheer wealth of richness to that world. This is a little bit more cutesy in its approach, so it's not as good as something like the Emerald Flame, but it's definitely very much up there in terms of how good the overall puzzles were in this escape room of a game. To me, rating-wise, I'm going to come in at a 4 out of 5. I think this is a very solid escape room in a box. Definitely one worth checking out. A few small quirks, some of which may just be prototype related. Again, like my main complaint about the envelope not being clear, this is the end as opposed to the last envelope. That's an easily solvable issue if they agree with me. And the app, that one's a little trickier to possibly solve, but again, it's not going to ruin your experience. I still had a good experience. Ultimately, those are my critiques and hiccups along the way. Anyways, that is going to be my review of the Ministry of Lost Things. Like I said earlier, I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. If you're looking for other escape room games, my personal favorites so far are going to be the Emerald Flame, is my favorite escape room game to date. And then if you want something that's going to be a little on the cheaper side, feels a little less premium, but will give you almost as good of an experience, definitely check out Mother of Frankenstein, which I think is also an excellent escape room experience. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.